are biologically based. They're built into us for very important reasons, primarily to keep us safe and to keep us alive and keep us connected with our community. They give us clues on what to do. So for example, I might feel afraid, and so that's my biology telling me you should run. I might feel guilty, and that's my biology telling me whatever you're doing, do less of it. I might feel joyful, and that's my biology telling me whatever you're doing, do more of it. So happiness as an emotion, interestingly, is the opposite of all of those. It's actually the absence of emotion. It's the place and time where you don't have to do anything. So I want you to think about it in terms of like you're riding down, you're driving in your car and you're going down the highway and the gas light comes on. It's an indicator that you need to fill up with gas. Or the tire light comes on, an indicator you need to take care of the tire. Happiness is that state, that emotional state where nothing is happening. Nothing's lighting up and there's nothing you need to do. Some people call this contentment. Now it's different from joy. Again, joy and pleasure indicate that you're doing something great and you should do more of it. Happiness, oddly, is saying whatever you're doing, it's a-okay with me, just keep doing it. The second definition of happiness has to do with happiness as an ever-stating change of being. The most common complaint I get when I talk about happiness is that you can't be happy all the time. You are right, you can't be happy all the time. But sometimes there's value in our unhappiness. That if you're going to a job that you don't like, maybe that's an indicator it's time to make a change. If you're stuck in a relationship that is not working well, maybe that means it's time for a change. So there's some value in our unhappiness and being able to listen to that. The third definition of happiness, which people kind of have debated, the authors have debated a little bit, is this notion of happiness as a sense of satisfaction, of well-being with your life. Now, one of the differences is this is not always happy. Figuring out our meaning, figuring out our purpose in life, taking on difficult tasks to make ourselves a better person is not always a joyful process, but in the end, this overarching notion that there's been more good than bad is the sense of what happiness is. But I also, and this applies to today, is that happiness is also a skill that can be learned, a skill that can be learned. And so I want you to keep in mind as we move forward with that. So one of the questions I get all the time, and here's a place where if you have questions, feel free to chat and I'll try and answer some that come up. The first one is, can we be any happier? Is it possible to even change our happiness? And yes and no. So genetics comes into play. So all of us, that happiness is actually part of our genetic makeup. And what I mean by that is that we all exist on a continuum of happiness ranging from Eeyore to Buddy the Elf and somewhere in between. All of us exist on this continuum at some place. Now, that's what makes it difficult to say that other people are happier than I may be, because they may just be different. So it'd be like saying, I want to be as tall as that person over there. It may not relate. Now, here's the good news, is about 50% of that we can change. We can change. We have some ability. Remember, I said it's a skill that can be learned, so we can actually change it. I just want to see if there's any. All right. Let me close out of here and see if hang on, now I'm stuck again. Let me unfreeze it really quick. Share my screen. Okay, so the other thing I want you to keep in mind is that happiness is, oops, I don't think I'm sharing that. Is I want you to keep in mind that happiness is a developmental process. And what I mean by that is that it's related to age. And so for some of you, this may be good news. For some of you, this may not be great news. but it really works as a U-shaped curve. And what I mean by that is that in our early 20s, we tend to be pretty happy. And that's because we're excited about the world. We're excited about what's available. We're excited about what may come. The problem is then that slowly declines to our mid 30s, early 40s. And part of that is because all those ideas, all those grand schemes that we had in our early 20s may or may not be available to us. They might have fallen apart, or we get them, but we realize they take a lot of work to maintain. And so you get that house, you get that relationship, you have those kids, and you realize, wow, that is a lot of work. Similarly, that you may find that you get those things and you're not any happier. And you're like, well, what was all of that work for? The good news is that in our mid 40s for women and early 50s for men, it starts to rebound, with us hitting a peak happiness level again at 66. And that relates, I'm pretty sure, to retirement. Now, the good news is that stays pretty stable, and we keep that up for a while and maintain a lot of happiness throughout the end of life. When it starts to go down is our mid 80s, and part of that has to do with health-related issues. Here's the dilemma, though, when I talk about happiness, is that happiness is not a good state from an evolutionary perspective. Evolution doesn't want you to be happy. Evolution wants you to collect more berries. They don't ever want you to say, like, yeah, I'm good with one woolly mammoth. Evolution wants you to keep growing and keep moving. And so we do have to work at it. How do we do that? It depends on what part of happiness you really want to focus on. So if you want to think about happiness as an emotion and bringing more joy or more contentment, then we can talk about gratitude, we can talk about fun, we can talk about meditation. All of those help us to find this place of calm and peace that happiness brings. If you want to look at making changes in our life, we have to deal with that unhappiness and really be able to sit with that unhappiness to figure out how do we become happier. And then again, living a life well lived is thinking about how do we make meaning? How do we come up with spirit? How do we find those things in life that are important? And that's through meaning, through our ikigai, which we'll talk about in a minute, and of course, relationships. So happiness research, there's been a ton of happiness research. It really has been, it goes back to Socrates actually, of people thinking about what is happiness and how can we be happier. But we've also turned it into an area of pretty rigorous scientific study, to the point where we could actually identify a happiness molecule. We've put people in fMRIs and watched their brains light up, and then we've also asked them. And we have multi-year longitudinal studies. Well, here's the good news. I'm going to sum all that up for you right now so that you don't have to do the research yourself. So first and foremost, here are the things that don't impact happiness. These are evidence-based to say these don't actually change our levels of happiness. So the first is actually job title. Now, what I say when I say that, what I mean is that your particular job matters. Where you spend your time and how you spend your days matters. However, CEOs are no happier than people who bag groceries. Lawyers are not necessarily any happier than artists. And so there is not necessarily one happier type of job. Rather, it's really figuring out, is it a fit for you? Do you like where you are? Do you like the things you're doing on a day-to-day basis? And that's really what influences happiness. Environment, meaning that people who live on the beach are not necessarily any happier than people who live in the city. People who live in the mountains are not necessarily happier than people who live on the farms. It's all pretty self-defined of what makes you happy. Past trauma in history or life stressors, in fact, again, that the research has shown that people are resilient, that having had a bad life previously doesn't destine you to a bad life forever, that people can overcome, and in fact, sometimes that's a catalyst for searching out happiness. I want to skip to the next one, which is health, both physical and mental health conditions. In my studies, I interviewed people who had physical and mental health conditions and still were able to find happiness. The next one is a little bit controversial around this notion that money can't buy happiness. And there's some truth to that. It can, but only up to a certain point. So really, happiness and money come in kind of a U-shaped curve. In that it goes to a certain point, sorry, not a U-shaped curve, a curve that flattens out. So it flattens out. It doesn't make you any happier beyond a certain point. That certain point is what we call basic needs plus. And what that means is that you have enough to kind of meet your basic needs. You can pay for all of your basic needs and then go see a movie or get a cup of Starbucks and still feel okay about it. Anything beyond that just becomes not necessarily, doesn't actually increase your happiness in any way. The difficulty with that is we don't really believe that. Is one of my favorite studies over the past year was millionaire studies. And it just showed that people who have billions of dollars couldn't actually want any more, still really like making money. It makes them happy, even though they could never ever possibly spend it. And so there's some thought that it's about the collecting, it's about the getting the money, it's the reward center that lights up in our brain from earning money or having money, not necessarily from actually having it and feeling secure. It's also some notion that we never have enough. There was one study done where they interviewed people at different strata of income and found that it didn't matter how much you made, that people who made less than $40,000 were asked, how much more would you need to be happy? And they said, $2,000 or $3,000. And then people who made $100,000 were asked, how much more would you need? And they said $10,000 or $15,000. And up and up and up, even to people who are making multi-million dollars a year saying, if I could just have another couple $100,000, I probably would be good. I would hit that basic needs plus. And so there is some thought that we never actually feel like it's enough. So before I move forward, I'm just wondering if anyone has any questions that they might like to ask or challenge me via chat on any of these. I'll give you just a minute here to see if anybody has any questions or wants to challenge me on any of the chat. And you can either chat or you can actually even turn off your mic. We have a small enough group that you could probably even turn off your mic and ask me directly. All right, looks like there's a chat. I'm wondering, Matt or Tiffany, could you guys text me that if I look at it, it will, I'll have to restart it. So we'll just see if there's any other questions or if anybody wants to ask me something out loud. All right, there's a couple of chats. Actually, I'll go ahead and pull them up and answer them really quickly. It said, how could a job type not influence happiness? I feel like my job stresses me out so much, which affects my life when I'm not working. Great question. And so, as I said before, that it's not necessarily your particular job, because how you spend your days matters. How you spend your day matters. And what you think about matters. And a lot of people spend a lot of time and energy thinking about their job. I think one of the things we've seen during this pandemic, as people are trying to do their jobs from home while also parenting, while also managing their own stresses, is that there are certain parts of our job that need done, and there are certain parts of our job that maybe don't need done. And so in a weird way, thinking about how we can shift some of this is thinking about, are there things we're learning about our job now that we're doing them from home that may impact or influence how we work once we get back to work? And I think that's a really valid question. Now, there are some job types that are actually happier, if that makes sense. And some of the unhappy jobs, I think we know. I think we could figure out jobs that are super stressful. But there actually is a job, and again, I don't know now if this is true, But there's a group of people who reportedly, even though their jobs are super stressful, they're happier than other professions. And that's actually elementary school teachers. And there's a couple reasons for that. So one is that they get to start afresh every year. So even if you have the worst class in the world, guess what? Next year you get to start over. They also get to see growth. They get to see change. And I think a lot of us in our jobs, we don't get to see growth or change. It's kind of some of the same thing all the time, every day. They also have a start and a finish to their year, and it starts over. A lot of us just keep feeling like we're on the treadmill. And finally, and I think what is most important, is that they get to be with elementary schoolers. The average 6-year-old laughs about 400 times a day. I don't know what's so funny, but I think that that may be why being an elementary school teacher is so much fun. Now, I want to come back and again say, if your job is super stressful, if it's not making you happy, there's also a place to explore that. What about your job is not making you happy? Or, is it you need to do something different? And right now, I think a lot of our jobs aren't making us happy just because we're trying to figure out how to do them in a very different way. Well, let's get to the stuff that you guys all showed up here for, which is things that do impact happiness. So first and foremost, across the board are relationships. It doesn't matter what study you look at, what researcher you talk to, that relationships, strong, meaningful relationships, and we're going to talk about this more in depth, are pretty critical to happiness. Next is something called purpose and meaning, or ikigai, if anyone has heard the term ikigai. And basically what that is that's the reason we get out of bed. For some people, that is a job. But for other people, that's not. That could be to tend to their garden. That could be to take care of their grandchildren. That could be for any different number of reasons that have nothing to do with going to work. And so thinking about what is my purpose and what is my meaning. Thinking more about gratitude. So gratitude is actually an experience that requires a different part of our brain than having strong emotions. So people who are grateful are happier. Service and altruism is another one. Really thinking about taking care of other people, doing kind things. And that's something we're going to talk about as a strategy to help us get through some of the pandemic. Fun can always increase our happiness. Being outside, interacting with nature. So again, maybe hard to do in a time of stay-at-home orders, but it doesn't mean we have to go hiking. It could just simply be sitting on your back porch, enjoying the sun, enjoying the grass. Do nothing time. Our brains need time to collect themselves. Our brain needs time to process. And sometimes we need do nothing time. And that doesn't mean do nothing time of watching TV. It literally is just giving our brain a chance to put everything together. Creativity and flow, doing things that we feel good about. That's going to be different for each one of us. And then finally, some level of spirituality. This is not religion, but some level of spirituality. So again, I'm going to open it up to questions. If anybody would like to chat, or even again, unmute yourself and ask a question, we're going to go into these in more depth here in a minute, but I want to see if anybody has any questions that I could answer about things that do impact happiness. Pretty straightforward for the most part. I don't think there's anything surprising on here. The one that I didn't put on here because it is controversial is parenting. And part of that is because it's the one evidence-based topic or category that's proven to cause both happiness and unhappiness at the exact same time. And really what we find is that it can bring about happiness, but really only not when you're actively parenting. So at other times, parenting makes you happy. Okay, let me see if there are any other, and it looks like I do have one chat. Let me check on that here for a question. Any ideas on how to practice spirituality without religion? Wow, what a great question. And so yes, there is some space to do this. So thinking about that this is not necessarily about a religious practice or a religious belief. In fact, there is some study saying that kind of the guilt that goes with religion sometimes can act against it. But it's more thinking much bigger and much broader of thinking there's a universe out there that's helping me, or that there's something bigger out there that has my back. There's something or something bigger than me out there that's guiding my destiny, that's guiding my fate, that's helping me to make decisions. And so I think that that's one way to think about spirituality in a little bit different way outside of religion. It looks like, hang on, I'm going to have to reset my PowerPoint really quickly here. And we'll go from here. Yep, you can. All right. So let's talk about my personal research really quick, because I think it ties in to what we're going to talk about today. So I did my own happiness study, and part of it came from me finding a time when I wasn't happy and I didn't like that. So I did what most normal people do. I went to the literature and I designed a study, right? That's how you figure out what happiness is all about. At least that's what I did. And so I interviewed a bunch of people who said they were happy, and I interviewed a bunch of people who said they were not happy. And then, interestingly, I interviewed people who weren't sure, who didn't fall into one category or the other. So let's talk about what I found. So what I found, first and foremost, is this notion of don't worry, be happy. And what I mean by that is that, remember that old song, Don't Worry, Be Happy? I think he was correct. Worry seems to really get in the way of happiness. And so thinking again about the pandemic and what's happening in our lives right now, worry definitely gets in the way of that. I found relationships. Everybody in my happiness study said that they had somebody meaningful or somebody important in their relationship, in their family. Again, spirituality. And this was not religion. In fact, it was lots of other things that could apply. Like I said, this sense or this notion that I'm not alone in the universe, that there's some other connection to me or some other being. Some thought that spirituality really mattered. This one I think is really important, is that happy people noted that they have boundaries. Happy people say no. I'll just repeat that for you really quick. Happy people say no. And I think especially in the time of the pandemic, this is challenging to do. It's challenging to pay attention to this and figure out what we mean by, I mean, how to say no and not feel guilt, how to say I'm trying to work and do my job and teach my kid all while dealing with a pandemic and I don't know how to do that. So happy people say no. Emotional experiencing, and what I mean by that is that happy people felt things, that if they were angry, they felt angry. If they were sad, they felt sad, and they allowed themselves to do that, to feel that. Next is resilience. Remember what I said about having a life of trauma doesn't necessarily mean that you can never get better. In fact, in my study, almost every single one of the happy people had something pretty horrific happen to them, something pretty bad, and then that served as a catalyst for wanting to be happier. And then finally is overall, they had to work at it. I had this very small group of people that I refer to as naturally happy people. And what that means is that they just were happy. They didn't do anything to be happy. They also had fairly low levels of neuroses as well. But most of the people in my happiness study said, one, they check in with themselves and say, am I happy? And two, if they didn't, they took steps to change it. And a lot of them had rituals or routines that they purposefully put aside to make themselves happy. Let's talk for a minute about the unhappy people. So again, wanting to control or at least know what's going to happen. So for that group of people, I'm thinking the pandemic feels really uncomfortable right now. Feels uncomfortable for most of us, but for people who want to control, who want answers, who want to know what's going to happen, this is a really tough time. And it was for the people in my study. The people in my study also had relationships, but they spoke about them differently. They really viewed relationships as a burden, not a benefit. And what I mean by that is they would say things like, I would take that job on the other side of the country, except I don't think my wife would want to move. Or, I have to live close to my parents because I want to be able to take care of them as they get older. So they really viewed it as a burden, not necessarily a benefit. But sometimes they were incorrect. So what they found was a lot of their happiness was based on the expectations of others or feeling trapped by others' needs. So again, going back to this notion of relationships as a burden, is they would say things like, I would love to go to the gym after work, but my kid wants me to pick him up right after school. Well, what was funny is when I could start to talk to their relationship, people in their relationships, because I use snowball sampling, so sometimes I get to talk to partners or friends, a lot of times those expectations weren't even correct. So the guy who said, well, I would move across country if my wife would agree to that, well, he had never even mentioned it to her. He just thought that's what it was. And I want to pay special attention to this because I think right now, as we're trying to work from home and redefine our new normal, how much of it is trying to meet the expectations of others, of saying, my boss thinks I need to do this, so I better do it. Or my neighbor wants help with this, so I better do it. Or even within your own household. Are you talking about these things, or are you simply relying on expectations? And finally, the last thing I found from the Happy People survey was feeling stuck, that they felt like they were stuck and they couldn't move. So before I move on, I want to go ahead and see if I can pull up, oh, I can't get to the chats right now. I'll come back and answer some of these questions, but really one of the questions I had is, what's the difference between the happy and unhappy people? If I can pinpoint one difference, and there was no difference by age, there was no difference by gender, there was no difference by socioeconomic status. Really, there was only one thing, and this is it. This notion that it's going to be okay. Well, here we are. Here's our dilemma. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We don't know when it's going to end, and we don't know if we're going to be okay. So back to my question that I started this with is, how in the heck do we talk about happiness when we don't know if it's going to be okay? And I can't tell you it's going to be okay. I wish I could, but I can't. And so I think it's coming back to thinking about it's going to be okay. How do we talk ourselves into that? And can we use the happiness to do that? So it is going to be okay. I mean, in reality, it is going to be okay. At some point, things will feel normal. At some point, we are going to find our way out of this. I don't know when, but we'll just take advice from Olaf here and figure out how to control what we can, which is our own happiness. As I said before, that, you know, in general, I do these workshops all the time. I do about one a month and talk to people about how to set up their happiness plans. Problem is it's not business as usual. The things that we normally would advise, the things that I would suggest you do, you can't actually do right now. I said, what's the number one reason for a happiness predictor? It's relationships. Well, we're social distancing now. We don't have access to the same kind of resources that we might. I was explaining it to a client, and we were talking about her depression plan and how we couldn't really work on her depression plan right now because I would have her go out to eat, or I'd have her meet up with friends, or I'd have her go run a marathon or do other things that really have her interact with others. And she can't do any of that now. And it's kind of like trying to train for the Olympics for swimming in our bathtub. We have to deal with what's in front of us and what we can do. So at the end of this, you may want to revise your happiness plan. But for right now, let's see if we can figure out on what works. Before we do that, I want to take a couple of chats if I can pull them up here. So I'm just going to stop share for a minute and go ahead and pull up a couple of chats. And said, what's the best way to avoid worry? That is a great question. I wish I knew that. So there are lots of things we can do to kind of avoid worry and address worry. And I think that one is our thought process. And to come back to Olaf's ideas of, can we control this? Is this something we can fix right now? And the answer is probably no with a lot of the things we're worried about. So really, again, it's coming back to thinking about, where can you make a difference? You can choose what's for dinner. You can decide what board game to play. You can't control when your business might reopen. And really thinking about that, thinking about what can we control and what can we do. So let me pull my screen back up. and so let's talk about what can we do when we're in this weird modified space where we can't do what we're normally doing. I want to talk about relationships. In the literature, relationships exist on two different levels. First is personal relationships. These are our close personal relationships. And these are the people right now, the people who live with us. It may be close friends or close relatives, and they may or not be in your house, but those people who are really important to you. In the literature, we define this as close relationships. We then have a second level, which I think we are finding is more important than maybe we gave notice to before. It's something called community integration or social integration. And these are the people who may not be your best friends. They may not know all your deep, dark secrets, but you see them all the time and you interact with them and you enjoy them. And I think that's definitely something that we are missing right now. Our personal relationships we are in contact with, but I think we're missing a lot of our community. So let's think about how we can focus on this, doing activities of what will work. So for those close relationships is thinking about how we can vary our social presence. Social presence is basically all the methods of communication from sending a letter to face-to-face. We can't do all of that right now, so what can we do? We can use technology as a bridge. There are a lot of fun apps. We can do Zoom meetings. We can do house party. We can text each other. We can play games online. There's lots of ways we can do that and lots of ways we can enhance it. For example, you could add on some fun Zoom backgrounds. One of my favorite posts that keeps coming up is a woman who turned herself into a potato before her business meeting. You could put on costumes. I have a friend of mine who posts her remote work costume every day. And I'm sure it brings some light and fun to her coworkers. So thinking about how can we use that? But also technology is not the only answer. I know at the end of my day, when I've been on the computer all day, the last thing I want to do is hop back on to do Zoom or text or FaceTime. So in what other ways can we stay connected? What about cards? What about letters? What about sending pictures or videos? What about digging out old pictures and videos and looking at that and thinking about that? And so we have this whole range of strategies that can keep us connected even when we can't use face-to-face. Similarly, for those close relationships, as I was talking about expectations, is making sure that those people you're quarantined with, that you're having some conversations about expectations. What are we doing well? What is not going well? And then our community, which I said I think people are really missing, and we're just now really realizing how much we miss them. So things like, again, strategies. So thinking about the Front Porch Project. This is an article that I wrote at one point talking about how we interact with our communities and how we can do that simply by sitting on the front porch. And we can still do that. A lot more people are taking walks. What if you just sit on your front porch and say hello to neighbors? A way to stay connected. Because people are scared, I'm finding that people are mean. And maybe mean isn't the right thing, but they're a lot more withdrawn. So I've lived in my neighborhood for a long time, and I always say hello to people when I go on walks, and people aren't doing that anymore. And I think it's because we think social distance means we also can't say hello. We can't say, how are you doing? We can't say, how is your day going? Which we can if we do it in the right way. Thinking about what else are you doing in your neighborhood? A lot of you may be participating in the community howls. And here in our house, it's become one of the highlights in our day. One is it's a nice release, but two, it also, for me, it reminds me I'm not alone in this. I'm not alone. There are lots of other people out there doing the same thing and thinking the same thing. And then other ways that you can just let your neighbors know you're thinking of them. We've done so many scavenger hunts, looking for bears, looking for shamrocks, looking for chalk art, of neighbors really helping neighbors even if they can't be physically present. So again, varying that level of social presence. One of my neighbors in his driveway actually built a giant chutes and ladders game that you can go and play, again, by yourself, you and your kid, or by yourself in his driveway. He's not there, but he set it out for other people. Other people putting up notes of encouragement or sidewalk chalk art. And then finally, one of the things that you can do, even all by yourself, is a loving kindness practice. And what that is is really that gratitude for the people who are in your life, sending them love, sending them caring, thinking about, I hope they're well, and thinking about people you like and people you care about and people in your community. And that doesn't require any interaction. It's simply you just sitting and being present with, wishing well to all of those out in the world. The next one that, again, activity that can really help us during this time is altruism. But there's this dilemma, is right now, how do we help? You know, it's not like there's a hurricane where we can all go out and start sweeping up or rebuilding, that in fact, we can only help from our homes. So one of the conversations I've been having with clients over and over is, how do I help in a way that actually is helpful? And what can I do from my home or from my small part of the world that makes me feel like I'm helpful? That it's not about me and my dilemma, but really thinking about how I can help others. So you can always, again, make donations. You can offer to buy meals. There are actually things set up where you can order meals for doctors or nurses or grocery store workers, maybe even offering to run errands for neighbors, but even sometimes a brief check-in of people who you maybe know don't have as much interaction, a quick text, sending cards, other things that help us all feel connected. I think the dilemma is right now, it doesn't feel like enough. It doesn't feel like we're helping enough. And so I would challenge you to think about, again, what unique skills do you have that you may be able to share with the community or even in your own home? To say, what if I make dinner for myself and my neighbors and leave it on the porch? Something I can do to help, even if it's not this great grand gesture. As I said before, gratitude is pretty powerful. And one of the things I think we're challenged with right now is, what do I actually have to feel grateful for? We are stuck at home. I can't do my work. There are people losing money. There are people losing their lives. What on earth can we be grateful for? And this is where we get into some of that purpose, that meaning, that tougher stuff that comes in when we think about happiness. And so for right now, what are the things you are grateful for? Yes, I'm stuck at home, but you know what? I can see the mountains from my backyard. I can still take walks. I'm here with people I care about. I still have my job. Similarly, what good can come from this? So as I said before, is maybe one of the things we're learning during this time is the way we can live differently. Have you learned how to do your job differently? Have you learned that there are certain things maybe you don't need to do every day? So thinking about, again, going back to our initial our initial gratitude experiment, is what are the things that don't make you happy, but can you find some gratitude for that? It's really taking our gratitude practice to the next level. Maybe you're not there yet, which is okay. So thinking instead, noticing the good. What am I seeing out there that's good? When I turn on the news and only see bad, what can I find that's good? And really focusing on moment by moment. No, I don't know what's going to happen 3 weeks from now, but right now, in this moment, I'm okay. I'm hanging out. I'm enjoying chilling with my friends, learning about happiness. More specific activities you could do, like a daily gratitude journal. What was something that felt good about the day? What things for which are you grateful? Doing a gratitude exercise every night at dinner. And then finally, one of the projects I took on to experiment with happiness is something called the Thank You Note Project, where I made a deal with myself that I was going to write one thank you note a week for an entire year. And I thought, surely I can find 52 people for whom I'm grateful. I ended up writing actually 3 or 4 a week, because I made me realize how grateful I am. When I sent them out, the people who got those letters actually felt pretty grateful too. So that may be something, again, you're stuck at home, there's not a lot you could do. What about sending out thank you notes? Maybe to nurses and doctors and grocery store workers, but maybe also to that person who was a friend to you a long time ago when you needed them a lot. So thinking about how you can do that and switch to gratitude. And then finally, thinking about doing nothing. The secret of happiness sometimes means doing less. And here's some do nothing strategies. Of course, we have meditation. Outside time, spending some time in nature, or maybe you just need to daydream. So some do nothing strategies. And in fact, now's the perfect time for it. You know, it's okay to turn off Tiger King, take a break from your Netflix, step away, and just sit on your back porch and think about nothing. There's also this other piece too called fun. And fun can be the antidote to fear. I remember going to a training a long, long time ago and hearing a therapist speak about that, is that when we're most fearful, when we're most afraid, that fun, interestingly, is a way to combat that. I go back to thinking about the Saturday Night Live on right after September 11th. And really this challenge of, can we be funny? Can we make light, not of the situation, but can we find humor in the world, even when the world doesn't feel very funny right now? And so one of my favorite lines was Lorne Michaels asked Rudy Giuliani, who was mayor at the time, can we put on the show? And the agreement was, yes, we need to do this. We need to have some fun. And the next question was, can we be funny? And Giuliani said, why start now? And I think there's some, again, right there, something we can joke about. I want to talk about this happened in my own house, is that April Fools, I have a 7-year-old, and April Fools is a pretty big holiday for 7-year-olds. But I'd seen lots of things on Facebook about how we should really tone it down this year and how we needed to be taking things seriously. And in fact, that April Fools should be canceled. Well, again, I wasn't necessarily going to do that to a 7-year-old, so we had some toned down pranks. But for the most part, we kind of kept it pretty low key. Midday, my daughter kind of fell apart and said, you know what, I've been waiting to be pranked all day and this isn't fun. This is not fun at all. This day is supposed to be better. Why is this happening? And I said, well, you know what? We're in this state right now where we're taking things a little bit serious. The world's pretty serious. And I don't know that it's right to be having fun right now. And she, through her tears, said to me, you know what, coronavirus has already taken my school and taken my friends and taken my ability to hang out with neighbors, and now it's taking April Fool's Day too. And for me, I'm like, nope, that's it. That's my boundary. We are taking April Fool's Day back. And we did with a vengeance. And so the three of us spent the rest of the afternoon pranking each other. I called friends and family who got in on the pranks. And by the end of the day, she had actually regretted making that statement. But we probably laughed harder that day than we had in a really long time. And you know what? It felt good. After being in quarantine for 3 or 4 weeks, just laughing at silly pranks felt really good. And so that's the question, is what are you doing to break up the monotony of the pain? How are you using fun as the antidote? And so here's some, again, some silly ideas. You can dance, play board games, go outside, build forts. I mean, home is a perfect time to build forts. We actually built a snowman yesterday and turned it into a tribute to coronavirus. That's a whole nother story for another time. But we built some toilet paper snowmans, just again to break up the monotony and to not feel so afraid. When you talk about worry and how do we deal with the worry, I can't control some of these other things, but I can at least have fun. At least in that moment, there's a place for me to take a breath and have some fun. And so that would be one of the things I would encourage you to do. If you do nothing else, if you walk away from nothing else from this workshop today, it's, can you inject a little bit of playfulness into your quarantine? And maybe that's, again, just watching something silly on Netflix. Maybe that's putting on funny music. Maybe that's doing a dance party in your kitchen. Anything that kind of breaks up the monotony and reminds us that it actually is okay to be light. It is okay to laugh, even when it feels like it's so dark out there. So the question is, where do we go from here? So one is, I just want to answer some questions today, but we want to be able to support you through this. So we are not done. So what we're going to do, the plan moving forward, is to go ahead and dig into each of these happiness topics in a little bit more depth. So coming up, here's our plan, and I'll post these on our website each week. Next week, we're going to be talking about technology. How can we have fun with technology to maintain our relationships? How can we really use technology and use apps not as a barrier, but to bring us closer together? The following week, we're going to talk about happiness being contagious and thinking about empathetic joy, which may be something many of you hadn't heard about, but really this notion of how can we be happy for other people and really grow with that. We're going to have some fun, loving the time of a coronavirus, and thinking a little bit about what's happening with dating and intimacy. So it should be a really fun, good time. We're going to talk more about mindfulness, gratitude, and going more in depth. And then we're just going to have some fun. We're going to channel our inner goofballs and see what we can do to just have fun with this. So over the next several weeks, we're just going to be in this together. We are going to help you laugh. We're going to help you have fun. We are going to try and be that sunshine in the storm. We are going to be that April Fools when everybody else is toning it down. We're going to take this serious. We know you're worried. We know people are dealing with anxiety and depression, but we also want to bring some hope back into, and I think some of those happiness strategies can do that. So we're going to keep doing this together. So what I want to do now is I just want to open it up for questions. Anything else you want to know about happiness or making it through this time? And really, again, how can we control what we can? I want to thank all of you guys for joining me today, taking some time out of your afternoon to come and be present and listen to some of this. But I want to hear if you guys have any questions at all or anything else that may be on your mind or other fun happiness topics that you'd like us to add to our list of potential topics. Okay. So we have some chats of just saying, hopefully, you know, some of the pandemic talk of how we modify for a pandemic has been helpful. All right, how do I force myself to be funny? Oh, that's a great question. I don't know that you can force yourself to be funny. That's a really valid point, but you can be playful. So others may not find you funny, which is okay, but can you be playful? Can you put on music and dance? Can you find an activity that may be out of your comfort zone? Can you be creative? So like I said, that we have done more scavenger hunts. We've been looking for shamrocks and bears and red cars and upside down numbers, anything you can do to kind of add some playfulness. So it doesn't necessarily have to be funny, but more fun. And this is an activity I do a lot of times. People say, what used to be fun for you? What used to be fun? When you were a kid or when life felt lighter, what were some things you did that were fun? And can you do that now? Can you do that now? So some people are talking about nature. And again, there was a study that basically said we need about 2 hours a week, but not more than 6. More than 6, again, it kind of levels off. But if you can at least get 2 hours of nature, even if, like I said, that's sitting on your back porch or your front porch, we can still take walks. We can still take walks and doing what we can. There was a question about the thank you card project, and can I talk more about that? So yeah, it basically, again, is deciding, and you can do during the pandemic, you could say once a day, I'm going to write a thank you note to somebody. And it could be, again, somebody really important. Maybe you're going to write a thank you note to your mom, or it could be the pharmacist who went out of their way to fill a prescription for you. So really saying, I'm going to choose to be intentional and think about who do I feel grateful for and how can I let them know? How can I let them know? And then just pop it in the mail or collect them all or send it via email, or you have online cards, or make a little video and send it to them. Whatever feels comfortable to you, I think is what makes sense. So do what makes sense to you. And again, some of these things aren't going to feel comfortable to everybody. I'll be honest, I am a bit of a goofball. I am playful, and I work really hard to do that. And I'll say it's benefited me that I at one point worked at a residential center, and you know, Saturday afternoons was kind of my time, and I would bring in games or scavenger hunts, or we put on plays. And in part for kids who had no other way out, it brought really a nice reprieve. A Saturday afternoon is our time to just let ourselves go, be silly, be ridiculous, and just have fun. And so again, it's not about being funny necessarily. It's just about finding that playful spirit, whatever works for you. That may be dancing, that may be reading a silly book, that may be, again, there's lots of really ridiculous things on Netflix that you can find, or YouTube. And I'll let you know that it helps that during one of my most difficult times, David S. Pumpkins from Saturday Night Live was like what pulled me out, what pulled me through. So just thinking about where can you find humor? Where can you find humor and happiness? And saying again, worrying doesn't add to the happiness. This playfulness, this joy gives us a bit of a reprieve. All right. Other questions? Does anybody else have any other questions or anything else they might like to know? Or again, if you have topics happiness topics that you'd like us to cover, we'd be happy to do that. And it won't always be me. I'm actually going to bring on some special guests, which I think will be fun and playful. Another fun and playful way to talk about this. Okay. Any other questions or anything else that you guys would like to mention to me? This video will be available on our website, hopefully by the end of the week. And then we will record anything else. But we will continue to do this on Tuesdays here on out until we no longer need to talk about happiness. So hopefully you'll plan on joining me at 4:30 each week to talk about this. So the website is www.coloradodepressioncenter.org. If you miss that, you can just Google Depression Center or Johnson Depression Center. And it's all the information you need is actually right there on our front page. All right, any other questions? Well, then I hope all of you have a lovely, happy evening. I wish you all a great evening just to relax, have fun. I will stick around if other people have other chats or just want to ask me questions. But otherwise, hopefully I'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Bye, Amy. Bye, Amy.
Hi guys. How are you?
Good. Thank
That
you.
was very good.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you. Just real quick, there was one, let me see if she's on. Oh, that's okay. Somebody else had asked about depression for teens, but I'll talk about that moving forward. So
Okay.
thank you guys for joining me.
Love it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Bye. How to cope with depression during this time? That's actually a really good question, Monica. I want to go ahead and respond to that with everybody here. Thinking about one of the dilemmas is that right now, how we deal with this depression, how we would deal with depression normally, we can't actually do in the same ways we normally would. And what we're seeing in the mental health community is we're definitely seeing a pattern that the first couple weeks people were anxious. People are now getting depressed. And what we would say is go out, talk to friends, interact with other people. We can't do that right now. And so we're really having to think about how can we fight this depression when it feels pretty hopeless. So some suggestions again are getting outside when you can, doing what you can to get out, reaching out for help, talking to friends, managing your relationships, doing what you can to feel differently, for being more intentional about your play and being playful, but then also thinking about it makes sense that you're depressed right now. One of my clients actually said to me, she goes, yay, now the rest of the world gets to know what it feels like. And not in a yay like, but at least like, hey, now they understand what this feels like. But I think as best you can to do what you can do to manage your depression by getting out, following a routine, making sure you're getting up, getting dressed every day, reaching out for help. And if nothing else, there are a number of therapists available who are still doing work online or doing telehealth online. I just saw about half an hour ago that Regis University School of Professional Counseling is doing telehealth visits for anybody who needs them right now. And so that's one resource if you need additional help. But I think if you can use some of these strategies, the gratitude will help. The altruism will help. The setting boundaries and expectations and then following a routine will also help too. All right. Any other questions or any other things that I can answer for you? Let's see if there's any other chats. All right. Well, I think I'm going to go ahead and wind it down. Okay, I have one more chat. We have a thanks. Thanks to everybody. I'm going to go ahead and wind it down. I think, Brittany, we can go ahead and stop the record.